You all know Ant. If you don't know Ant, please come and speak to me. I want a word. And he will start us off now with an overview of our fiber best practices.
Thank you. There we go. Thanks, everyone. Last week I was supposed to go to a workshop on combating misinformation, but the organizers gave everyone the wrong address. Can we get the slides? So I'm hoping that most of you already read the best practices document, and I'm going to try and stick to a quick, high-level view of what they say, which means that I'm going to try and talk fast, because I'd like to leave as much time as possible to workshop some of the rough edges and things you might not have gotten right. Okay. Whilst we're waiting for slides, a little bit of background to the best practice document. It is a project of ISPA's Operators Working Group. The Operators Working Group is the bit of ISPA that figures out how ISPA engages with FNOs, MNOs, and any other NOs that pop up. It is about a 30-page document. It's not a pleasant read because it's a best practices document, but it's not a hard read. You can probably get through it in 10 minutes. The version that we're looking at the moment is version 3.1 that we published in December last year, and it is not currently on the public section of the ISPA website because we view it as a draft document, but if any of you don't have a copy and would like one, please ask the Secretariat. We will happily send it to you to read. The goal of this best practice document is to ensure that fiber users get a consistent, fair, and reasonable experience when they're getting services. So everything we have in that document is targeted at making sure the users get a good experience. The best practices do not exist in a vacuum. There is a lot of competition law, there's the Electronic Communications Act and POPIA that all inform what we have in there. We tried quite hard to get a lot of input from ISPs and FNOs. We sent it to a lot of FNOs, we visited some of them, and we got a lot of input from ISPA's members and from some ISPs that aren't ISPA members. And we're hoping that we get comments from this workshop that we will fold into the next version of the document. The document is fairly simple, has contents and introduction at the beginning, it has some acknowledgement and a version history at the end, and the meat is 4 bits in the middle. The first section, we talk about what we think open access networks are. Second part is communications with customers and whose responsibility that is. The biggest section is communication between FNOs and ISPs, and then we've got a couple of technical recommendations in the miscellaneous chunk. I'm going to have a quick look at each of those. First of all, section on open access networks. It turns out that there is not a good definition of open access networks. There is not a definition of open access networks in any telecommunication standards, and there is not a definition of an open access network in South African law at all. The best definition we could find was on Wikipedia, which is not a good place to get your definitions, because in the time since we used Wikipedia for our definition in this document, somebody has edited the Wikipedia page so it no longer says the same thing that we assumed it would when we prepared the document. In any case, what we assume to be minimum requirements if you want to call your network an open access network is universal transparent pricing. Both of those words are important. We think it should be transparent. You should not hide your prices behind an NDA. You should be willing to say what your prices are for your open access network to anybody who is interested in using that network. And the pricing should be universal. That means everybody using your network should pay the same price for the same service. Very importantly, if you're running an open access network, you should not be competing directly with the ISPs using the open access network. If you're running an open access network, it is quite important not to employ any discriminatory tactics. That's not just limited to pricing. When you roll out your network to a new area, if you give someone exclusivity in providing services for the first 3 months that you're providing services in that new area, you're not running an open access network, you're running a limited access network because it's not open to everybody when you roll out. Try and avoid doing that. Minimal barriers to entry. You should not, if you're running an open access network, go, I don't want to have more than 10 ISPs. Again, that's a limited access network. If you want to be open, you should have as many ISPs as want to come on board. We understand that you may have some costs for each ISP you add. You have administrative costs to onboard them. You have some technical costs because you have to provide some means to connect to them. Ideally, whatever your minimum commitments are should be limited to the cost to you to bring a new ISP on board. And you should also recognize that sometimes an ISP will want access to your network for strategic reasons to access a few customers because they're trying to service a corporate who has some people in different areas, and some of them are on your network, so they need to have access to fulfill that contract. Communications with customers. The licensing here is really clear in South Africa. We have electronic communications network service providers that are fiber network operators in this case, and we have the electronic communication service providers. Those are the ISPs. It is the ISPs that have customers. The FNOs have customers too, but those customers are the ISPs, not the end users. When it comes to personal information, we have some things in the recommendations document that are at odds with the current practice of quite a few FNOs. We do not believe that the FNO should be hanging on to customer data indefinitely because they are the ISP's customers. The ISP collects the information from that customer, where they live, their contact details. They give it to the FNO to do the installation. That is the purpose that they have that information. When the installation is done, the FNO should be deleting that customer's personal information because it doesn't need it anymore, and it is up to the ISP to look after that data. FNOs will argue, no, we need to have the customer's contact details in case we need to support them. No, if there is a need for you to support that customer, the ISP should be giving you those details again. That way, if they're changed, you're not using incorrect information, you're getting the current accurate information from the ISP. Linked to that, we believe it's the responsibility of the ISP to communicate and support the customer, not the responsibility of the FNO. This is something ISPs need to take to heart too. We frequently hear from FNOs that they have ISPs on their network who assume that the FNO will do some of the customer support and therefore invest less into providing their support. That's not how it should work. Service level agreements, if you have different service level agreements for different products, please make that clear to customers. That's for ISPs and FNOs. Then section C is the biggest section. It covers all kinds of communications between FNOs and ISPs. Most of this is common sense. FNOs should be transparent about network outages and provide accessible and accurate information to ISPs. Ideally, you should provide an automated platform for ISPs to check what the status of an individual line is, because if you can automate that, you don't have to have as many staff handling all the annoyed calls from ISPs to try and get information. It's worth investing in a solid API to interact with your ISPs, and as one of the panelists said earlier, that is an area where most FNOs have not invested enough. Please have a clear fault reporting process and an escalation path. Your fault reporting process will break quite a lot of the time, and ISPs need to have someone to tell that they're not getting feedback. And it's just common sense to communicate installation times and any limitations on your installation estimates clearly. Notice of price increases. We're going to have a look at that again at the end. Most FNOs give 30 days notice of price increases, and some of them give that notice after 5 p.m. on the 31st of the month, which is technically fine if you say you have to give 30 days contract, but it's a really mean-spirited way to do it. Please don't do that. You do not need to wait until 5 p.m. on the very last day you can give notice. The ISPs cannot give their customers 30 days notice of price increase if you leave it to the last minute. We recommend in the best practice recommendation 70 days. We would prefer it to be 90, but we've settled on 70. That is because ISPs sign up customers with different start dates during the month. So in order to be able to give all your customers 30 days notice of a change, you need at least 60 days, and we've added 10 days because you have to do some work inside the company to figure out prices have gone up, what am I going to charge, here's how I'm going to communicate that message, here's what my admin department needs to do, and we're saying that 10 days is pretty tight, but we're hoping that ISPs can do it in 10 days. Please, if you're an F&O, try and aim to give at least 70 days notice to your ISPs of price changes. Service upgrades. Please consider how you're doing this really carefully. Free upgrades are not free. When you go to market on the socials, as was mentioned earlier, and say, these are free upgrades, you are lying. They are not free upgrades. What you mean is, these are upgrades that we are not going to charge ISPs more for. That doesn't make them free. Doesn't make it free for the ISP. You may have to upgrade the port speeds at the NNI. Doesn't make it free for the ISP who has to have more capacity to carry the traffic from customers who've been upgraded. And it may not even be free for the customer, even if the ISP absorbs those costs, because some customers will have to upgrade the equipment they have to deal with the higher speeds. So it's very misleading when you're marketing something as free when it's not. Okay, the best practice recommendations view a change of customer as potentially two different things. An installation fee should be charged if somebody has to go to the customer's premises, put new equipment in, or change some of the configuration of the equipment that's already there. It's not an installation if nobody has to go out to the customer. At most, it's then an activation fee because you've got some administrative cost. And an activation should be a lot cheaper if you charge for it at all. Hopefully, we're going to have some debate about migrations and dispute resolutions at the end, so I'll deal with that then. And some more flexibility with cancellation notice periods would be nice too, for reasons that we'll also look at a little bit later. Hey, miscellaneous issues. So F&Os should please support 1500 byte MTU sizes. Most do, so that's good. And then Stanford's welcome to come up here and kick me now, because in the document at the moment we suggest that accurate and up-to-date network map data should please be made available in .kml format. I'm guessing we should update that to say KML is best practice at the moment, but it's not best practice in the long term. Right, so now we're on to some issues that I hope will stimulate debate, and we would really like for people to start giving us input. I'm going to go through these things, then I'm going to hand over to Gideon to try and get some discussion going. We want feedback on these best practice recommendations. We don't know whether we've got everything right, and we would like to improve them with your input. Let's look at notice of price changes. We covered this earlier. Our recommendations are 70 days. 30 days is not enough. ISPs need more warning. And if you're not going to be able to give them 70 days notice, then please don't penalize the ISPs when some of their customers cancel. Because that's a double-barrel thing. You're not giving the ISP enough chance to inform its customers, and when they cancel, you penalize them. And changes must please be communicated properly. A price increase is not something you should stick as an afterthought into your weekly newsletter that none of your ISPs are reading. And we see this. It goes into this newsletter that's being filtered off, no one ever reads. And a really common complaint we get from ISPs is they learn about F&O price increases by reading coverage on My Broadband, not because they've been getting a notice from their F&O. It's a big problem. Make sure you're communicating that clearly. It's fine to put in big letters, prices are going up in the subject line. You don't need to hide it. You need to make sure your ISP knows about it. Cancellation and migrations, a real pain point in the industry. F&Os have arbitrary cancellation date requirements. Now, you must tell us by the 28th of the month that you're cancelling the line, or you'll be charged for the next month. But ISPs really need more support from F&Os in dealing with non-paying customers. A debit order might fail on the 2nd, goes through again, it fails on the 7th. It's going to be the 10th before the ISP knows it's failed. They're not getting money from that customer. It's now the 10th of the month, so they're on the hook not just for that month, but for the next month too, for that customer's service. They're never going to get the money back, and yet they're paying the F&O for 2 months of service. That's all of the margin gone for that customer for the duration of that service. It'd be good to have some ideas from F&Os and how they can assist in terms of how they deal with these cancellation dates to provide better support for ISPs. Some ideas we've kicked around. It'd be great if F&Os could do pro rata billing for months. If you cancel the line on the 10th, then you should be charged up to the 10th. I know that the F&Os have not built billing systems that do this well, but when you're upgrading them, because you do need to keep upgrading your systems, consider being able to do this to give it a little bit more flexibility for what you're charging the ISPs. Worth noting, ISPs can afford to be a bit more aggressive in what they try and get back from their customers. So we know from the National Consumer Tribunal, having fined Vodacom millions of rands, that you can't charge 70% of the value of a contract when someone tries to cancel it. But you are entitled to recuperate installation costs, you're entitled to claw back any equipment costs, and you can charge a reasonable cancellation fee. That means if you know that you're going to be on the hook for 2 extra months of charges from the FNO, you can charge your customer an extra 2 months of service fees if they cancel. You're entitled to do that. You're not going to run foul of the Consumer Protection Act if you do. Just also notice in passing, the CPA actually says 20 business days is the notice your customer can give you. If you're saying 30 calendar days, you're not quite compliant with what the CPA actually says. Your customer could give you 20 business days and you say, oh, it wasn't a calendar day's notice. No, they can give you 20 business days notice. It would be good to see support, in some cases, coming back for line suspensions, for an ISP to be able to say this line is suspended, and for nobody to be getting any money from that line. So the FNO is not picking up money from the ISP is not charging the customer. That would really help with the managing non-paying customers. Migrations, a little bit more about migrations. Why do lines move from one ISP to another? Well, first, a customer might just be fed up with an ISP and want to change, obvious reason. You also get a lot of customers just trying to get out of paying by going to another ISP, running up a bill, let's move to another ISP and I'll pay them for a while and then I'll stop paying them too. Or there might be a free trial abuser. You see customers going for a 3 months trial and I've already put an order with another ISP before my free trial has run out. And the third one there, the customer using the line has changed. That's when you have a landlord, has tenants, the landlord makes it the tenant's problem to get the service. Person moves out, they don't cancel the line, new tenant comes in, the customer has changed. There's real difficulties in migrating that line because the previous customer's still on contract, hasn't cancelled properly, the ISP doesn't want to release the line, but the new person wanting to use it has nothing whatsoever to do with the old customer. Those are the 3 most common reasons, but we also see increasingly customers wanting to get service from 2 ISPs, so if one's down, they can still get service from the other. Technically, if FNOs can support that, we encourage it. And the last one, the line has moved not because anybody wanted it to, but because someone messed up the address. The line was ordered for 208A, and the poor guy who is in 208 has his line migrated because instead of assigning a new line to an ISP, 208's line has been moved from the ISP they were quite happy with to a new ISP. That's a line that is migrated even though it shouldn't have. It's really important as an FNO and an ISP that you have good processes and staff to support migration processes. It's vital that the ISP that is losing that line must be kept informed at all times, actively. It's not good enough for an ISP to have to go onto your system to know they're losing a line. You need to tell them. The ISP as an FNO is your customer. They are paying you. You should not summarily disconnect a service you're being paid for because someone else tells you that they want to start taking that service. You're still getting money from that ISP. Double dipping, this is interesting. So you require cancellation notice before the 28th of the month. The ISP tells you on the 10th they're cancelling the service. Another ISP is already providing service by the 1st of the next month. You're still charging the first ISP money for that line for that month, and you're picking up money from the second ISP. There are a surprising number of FNOs whose systems allow them to bill 2 ISPs for the same line in the same month. Right? If you're an FNO, then your system lets you do that. Please realize that there are jurisdictions in which that will be a crime to be charging 2 different customers for the same service in the same month. If your systems let you do that, please make them stop doing that. You should not be double dipping on the service. We have a slightly controversial recommendation. It'd be good to get some feedback on that. We think it's a problem to share information about bad paying customers. It's personal information. As tempting as it is to want to broadcast your list of customers that don't pay you to everyone in the world, you should not do that. You will get into trouble. But there's nothing stopping an FNO from saying this line has moved 5 times in the last year. Right? This is a line with a high migration number on it. That's not customer information. It's not related to any one particular customer. It is just a count of that line. So we're recommending FNOs do that. It's useful because it may be indicative of a problematic customer, but it's also likely to be indicative of a situation where you've got a landlord with a tenant that changes frequently, and if you see a high count, you want to take extra care that you're getting the right information from the customer to know that it is a customer that is a tenant, and you can manage that a little bit better. When there are line migrations, there will always be disputes. ISP1, ISP2 both believe they have a right to provide a service to a customer. You need to have, as an ISP and an F&O, some internal process for managing these disputes. You need to make sure that both the ISPs involved understand there is now a dispute, because they may need to resolve it. Ultimately, they'll have to resolve it with each other via the F&O. Requiring reasonable proof of who actually is the customer at that premises is a good idea. And right now in the recommendations, we're saying that if you've got two ISPs, both giving you evidence that they are providing service to that customer, you should err on the side of whoever currently has the line and not disconnect it. That is because that ISP is currently your customer. They are paying you money, so you should not summarily disconnect their service without a good reason. If anyone thinks this is a bad approach, please tell us, but this is what we have at the moment. And again, you need to make sure you have staff to support this. It's not great if you have a dispute process and nobody ever deals with those disputes, or it takes a week to deal with it, especially if your staff got confused between 208 and 208A, you moved the line, now there's a dispute, you need to have staff capable of resolving that. Right. Over to the audience. I'm going to sit down and start taking furious notes and hand over to Gideon. A few questions. Please come up to the mic, give us your input. What's a reasonable approach to cancellation periods? What should FNOs be requiring from ISPs? What could FNOs not cope with in terms of cancellation periods? What's the ideal way to handle line migrations from one ISP to another? How should FNOs resolve disputes between ISPs, and should they even be playing a role there? And then what do we all agree is a reasonable notice for price increases? It's not 30 days. We think it's 70. Maybe there's grounds for it to be longer than that. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Okay, first question, Willem. You're at the mic. Or Sol? No. Oh, sorry.
Hello. Hi, Saul from Unetworks. I think to Anne's point, it's imperative to understand who the customer is from the FNO's perspective. The ISP is the customer, not the end user. And so from the FNO's perspective, from an activation, from an end user, from a migration, the end user's name is irrelevant to the FNO. So Frank is staying at number 108, Bob moves in, the ISP is ISP A, and they get the new tenant. It's actually irrelevant to the FNO to change things, because the line is staying in the ISP's name, so therefore there's no migration, there's no reactivation. The line is staying in that person's name. That's called knowing your customer is the ISP. Whoever's using that service is actually irrelevant to the FNO. So activations, migrations, if it's staying with the ISP, that's what's important. And I agree wholeheartedly, activation, price increases, all those kind of things. There's no such thing as a free price increase. I think it was discussed quite heavily this morning. Lines need to, their costs, you might be offering a free upgrade from the line speed, but there are all the other services that go on top of that go to the cost pricing of the service.
Sol, sorry, before you disappear, I just want, there were two questions really. With regards to the line migration, you're specifically talking about a migration within the context of one ISP or across ISPs?
So same ISP. So it's currently deemed and you have to reactivate because there's a requirement for many FNOs that you have to re-register that line. If the lines, it's the same as if I can use sort of, if you have a link from Liquid or DFA to customer, they don't care who the customer is. It's at that premises. If you get the new tenant, the line's in your name. You're the customer of DFA, of the telecom, of OpenServe, whoever it is. It's the same story here. That line is in 108 Pitt Street. You know the tenant's leaving, or the house has been sold. You've been proactive, got the new landowner, new tenant's name. That's staying in your name. You're keeping the line. You've got the new customer. Sorry? So does that answer your question?
Yeah, but what I'm missing, I'm probably missing the intent of your question. How will the FNO know?
It's irrelevant.
Yes.
That's the point.
Yes.
The FNO doesn't need to know that the end user's changed because they're still billing the ISP. The ISP is still paying. So if the person in the house has changed, it's irrelevant to the FNO.
So is that a requirement from some of the FNOs to have that information,
Yes.
despite it being irrelevant?
Yes.
Okay.
And there's a charge for it. No, the recommendation is no. The FNO doesn't keep the details, but there's also a requirement that if the resident changes, you have to re-register and pay a fee.
Please come to the mic because there's people listening on the stream cannot hear you if you're not at the mic. Sorry, what's that?
Okay, I'm not sure if is there a change to the recommendations we need to take into account here? No. Okay. So with regards to your second question, was it, or the second part of your statement, is just a statement, or is there something you feel we need to amend? Okay, thank you.
Jan Vermeulen, my broadband. I have a different agenda than the ISPs in the room, obviously. But were there recommendations on how much to charge for cancellations, for downgrades, for activations? That's it. Thanks.
No, because ISPA is very respectful of the competition law, and it would be illegal for us to be discussing prices for services in an industry association.
Regardless of specific RAN amount, that whether there should or should not be charges?
The recommendations do have something to say about what charges are appropriate, yes.
Cool, thanks.
Thank you.
A very well done to the ISPA Fiber Working Group and the Operators Group for coming up with this document. I'd like to address, what does the document mean? I have an example, but it's maybe not a very good one, but there's this piece called A Woman of Valor, and it depends on which religion you come from, how you view this thing about a woman of valor. I know as Jewish people, we think that's only achievable by God, and many Christian women think that they can actually be a woman of valor. So are we as ISPA expecting FNOs to actually achieve best practice, or is it just like a document that they really should aim to achieve sometime in the future when maybe they can get better and focus on just getting operations going right now? I mean, is this really enforceable in any way? It's kind of like a bit weak unless we can incorporate it into like code of conduct or something like that. I hope that we have plans to incorporate it into a code of conduct, and we can hold FNOs accountable for actually making sure that they don't just see it as some target that they must reach, but some quality of service that they should actually apply as soon as possible. That's on the one side. I mean, I love the document. I would also like to talk to the ISPs in the room, because I feel that we're lacking in FNOs in the room.
Alan, can I ask you to hold the second part of your question, because I actually want to comment on the first part and potentially can add something more formal to that. I think it was great to have FNOs actually join a panel in an environment where there's a lot of ISPs who see things differently. And I think the document is a very good starting point for dialogue with FNOs. Because we're not just starting with random complaints, we're actually starting with recommendations which address things probably a bit more from an ISP perspective, but that acknowledges the FNO perspective. And I think the intent should be to have dialogue with them and get engagement, because we are, as has been repeatedly said, part of the same ecosystem. If that doesn't work, what one does after that, that's a different matter. But I do think this is a really important use of the recommendations.
So Alan, yes, we do have plans to do something with the best practice recommendations once it's done. If you read through the current document, in each section, this is the recommendations, then we've got a little box that says, checklist if you're an ISP, things you should be doing and not doing, checklist if you're an FNO, things you should be doing and not doing. Our goal, when we feel that the document is stable enough to be released as not a final version, but a finished non-draft version, the intention is to go through that and start scoring the FNOs to see how well they're performing based on our best practice recommendations. So as ISPA, we have 2 parallel projects. The next slot, which unfortunately is my voice again, we're going to present the results of the February perception study. That's asking ISPs how they feel about what the FNOs do, completely subjective. That's one aspect. Once we've got the best practices settled, we're going to go through those and say, objectively, this is how we think each network is doing in terms of our best practice recommendations. Do they support something better than .kml files? Are they offering everybody transparent, universal pricing on that? So we will be rating the networks based on our recommendations and giving the networks a chance to dispute whether we think we've rated them correctly or not.
Thanks. Alan, your second question?
Thanks, yes. It will gain traction and power over time. That's what we're saying. In the meantime, it's just something to look at. Yeah, I wanted to talk to the other ISPs and see if there's a way that we can work a bit closer together. Like, I know some of the big FNOs have kind of personal relationships with some of the big ISPs. It's quite clearly there's a little bit of background stuff happening that us smaller ISPs don't get to see within the big FNOs. You've got special people working there. And as bigger ISPs, I understand that you may not pay as much attention to detail as some of our smaller ones, and you might, by mistake, want to take over one of our customers' lines because you made a mistake with the address, the lease isn't very clear, and you're submitting the lease. Please, let's work together. If you're going to end up taking over our line, at least don't block us from getting it back. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous that Vumatel doesn't send out an email when another ISP wants to take over one of our customers' lines. We have to log into the portal. If we do it within the 72-hour period, we can reject it. And often we want to take over somebody else's line, and then it gets rejected because they're still in the 30-day cancellation period, and the FNO is trying to double dip here. So I don't know how, but we really need to work a bit more closely together when we're blocking each other and doing things that we shouldn't be doing to harm each other. We need to work together against the FNOs, please. So if you can help us make sure that those things go more smoothly, it will be much helpful to us. I find it really, really upsetting about the FNOs communicating with our customers. They do it without informing us, and they tell things to our customers that they should be telling us and not, telling them. Like last month we had a terrible outage in OBS, and apparently we were told. I've been told 10 times that we were told, but they can't tell us how we were told. They did tell us that the customers were told by SMS. Our customers were sent an SMS 2 days before. And they pointed out on their portal, if you log in, they did put a network notice on the portal at the time that the 2 days maintenance started. So all our customers went down for 2 days because some joint needed to be replaced. Based on that, I don't want to give the FNOs any information about our customers. I've told our staff to please put your telephone number there and you arrange the time for the installation. In fact, when you talk to the customer, get some pre-arranged times, and when the FNO calls you up to set up the installation, set one of those times and tell the customer. It's a bit more work for us, but at least then we're going to get the SMS when maintenance is happening there, and we can tell the customer. So my advice to the ISPs is stop giving your customer, if you can, if you have the capacity, don't give your customer information to the FNO. It's not part of the contract. You don't have to do it. If your customer changes, you don't need to tell them that. They only need to have your information. The only justification that they have for you to give them the customer number is so that you don't have to have the hassle to make the appointment to go and do the installation. But I'm stopping to do that, at least with certain FNOs. The FNO is going to have my mobile number and a few other staff mobile numbers, and that will be it going into the future, because we've really been burned badly by this. It's not fair. I could go on and on, but I'll let someone else have a chance.
Okay, so just, I know we did, in recommendations, we did struggle with the sharing of information, and I'm not sure what we concluded about what information FNOs should have or not have with regards to Alan's last question. I don't honestly agree with everything, but potentially we should. Okay, now it's too. I hate this mic. I'll try. So Alan, I hear you. I think a lot of people feel frustration. I'm just not sure how we can improve or amend the recommendations to alleviate that. I think we have a lot there already that if it is implemented should help.
Hi, Paul Huell. I'm hoping I don't make your life even more difficult than Alan did, but I probably will, and I might be giving Jan something to write about. I'm following on, and I hope I'm understanding Saul correctly, and I think it does tie into Alan a little bit, but on a very basic level, it should be the case that the FNO's client is the ISP, not the end user, and that has ramifications. And made mention of the default position and so on. The existing ISP is the FNO's client, therefore that should be the default stay position and so on. The concern that comes in my mind, and I'm not asking for a have you resolved this, and I don't know that you can completely resolve this, but is the most powerful tool to get adoption of these sorts of best practices by an FNO is if the FNOs are on board, because they also happen to have some form of ISP business. In other words, if they're an ISPA member or they're part of a group that's an ISPA member and so on, that introduces a whole bunch of other issues, particularly about FNOs wanting information and there being an ISP business in there. And what I'm just sort of wondering and sort of partly suggesting, but haven't thought it through completely, but is that in the process of getting a best practice position out from ISPA regarding relations between FNOs and their ISP clients, in addition to being very clear about the fact that the end user is the ISP's client, defining end user as the ISP's client, and the F&O may have, when you define communication between the F&O and end user, it's clear that the end user does not have a contractual relationship with the F&O, but is to, set up the revision process, to set up the continuation, of this mechanism on addressing the fact that F&Os and ISPs are going to have to collectively, continuously reshape and develop a deep, nurtured relationship. I mean, you're in bed together regardless, so it's best to make sure that those ground rules are developed over time, rather than just kind of going, hey, we've had these problems, we've developed these recommendations, and the only way that these recommendations are adopted happens to be the players where there's the greatest risk of later problems. I hope I'm making sense on that. Yeah, I hope I was clear enough.
It's quite a bit to absorb. So to clarify, is your concern is largely around, whether these recommendations are correct and useful, or is it whether we will get them accepted?
So my concern is that I think the recommendations are, as we are speaking, the most correct and most useful under present circumstances. That will not remain forever.
Okay.
For these recommendations to be meaningful, they have to be adopted and implemented, particularly by the F&Os.
Agreed.
The concern that I've got is that, and this is as somebody not currently affected by this other than as a user, is that the F&Os, which have the most incentive to actually follow what the ISPs are saying is best practice, also happen to be the F&Os who have the most incentive in tying up their ISP type business and their F&O type business. And that's the area where I see the most risk of conflict. My getting an SMS from a firm that is both an ISP and an F&O about my line going down when I'm with a different ISP kind of resonates on that. And I'm just sort of asking to what extent in the process to revise and continue building on these, is there kind of a mechanism to review that relationship and to harden some core understanding, like the end user is not the F&O's client, the contractual relationship is with the ISP and that sort of thing, which is, resonates the concerns that I've heard. So I'm maybe asking the same thing, but framing it a little bit differently.
I do think that's probably worth considering. What does occur to me is that, if F&O owns an ISP, they should have proper brand differentiation.
Yeah.
As the example, I don't think the consumer confuses Vox with Rockford, to pick an example. But there are cases where it is obviously confusing. And I don't know whether we cover that situation well in recommendations.
We don't, but one interesting thing that happened when we started sharing the best practice recommendations with the F&Os is almost all of them said, when we read through this, we're actually following most of the recommended practices, because it's a whole laundry list of things you shouldn't do, and most F&Os are pretty well behaved when you go through the whole list. So 80% sticking to the best practice, but there's 20% of those things that they're doing that are really problematic, and they're different depending on the F&Os. So the good news is for F&Os that probably you're actually doing most of these best practices already. Same for ISPs. What we want you to do is have a look at where you're not following those best practices, and please consider tweaking what you do. In terms of revising it, this document has had about 6 to 8 revisions already. We thought we were at the final version, and we got a flurry of new input. We do intend to revise it as necessary, as the market changes. It has to be a living document because this is an industry that changes quickly, and so our best practice recommendations will have to try hard to keep up.
Joe, go for it.
I'm wondering if there isn't sort of scope to make the interconnect stuff a bit more, let's say, standardized and somewhat well, I'd like to see the word cost-based somewhere in there. There was an event where one of the FNOs announced some new port fee pricing, and then within, let's say, I don't know, within 6 months, there was this kind of copycat effect where all the other guys just said, oh, that's groovy. I'm also going to make my port fees 4 times more. Obviously, pricing is a sensitive topic in this forum, but I think it'd be nice to see some kind of logic about things being cost-based.
Noted, and I know what you refer to. And honestly, I think most of us understand that that is about, not necessarily about the money, but about not wanting ISPs with 2 or 3 or 5 lines to be on the networks, because from an FNO perspective, that is not sustainable, having hundreds of trivial ISPs. I don't necessarily think the hiking the port fees was the right way to do that, because then it comes across a money grab, but that's my opinion. I don't really feel qualified to say anything about what we can say about those things in the best practices. Do we have anything that addresses that? Specifically the NNI fees being hiked, or the aggregation fees, whatever it's called. I do think it's worth discussing whether we can include that and in what form we can include that. So thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Anthony. I'm just from a small bit of the internet. So my question to Esper, besides just complimenting and saying thank you very much for this and being obviously a part of the process and being involved in the discussions for this document, I think it's a great document, and I think it's definitely going to be a living document. My question to Esper is there appetite in the dispute resolution processes that you currently already give us as ISPs to potentially get involved in disputes around FNOs and possibly the transfer processes from one FNO to another FNO?
That is another question I can not even begin to answer. I'm not immersed enough in the processes, honestly. Sorry, you go again.
So you mean more than the extent we already are, because Esper's complaints team is handling 1,600 complaints a year from your most angry customers, because they've got to be really angry to find out that there's an industry body that will deal with their complaints. No, I mean, I'm not kidding. I don't know whether Charles is, if Charles is in the room, but poor Charles has to deal with ISP's angriest customers every single day and try and use the mediation process to resolve disputes. So he does, and the team does deal with these kind of line disputes all the time, and has to try and get the parties involved to agree on how to handle it. But I think you're suggesting, is there a more formal role specifically when it comes to disputes? No idea. I'm not sure if that's something Esper wants to invest energy into, whether it's necessary, but it's definitely an idea worth considering.
Something I can add to that. I've actually considered lodging a code of conduct complaint against another member once, because I could not get any traction through the correct channels, and I ended up not doing it because I thought it would have seemed really, really petty. Since I'm not looking at my problem as a consumer, but as a business customer of that entity. Now, I mean, other people can tell me whether the code of conduct would have helped me there or not. But that does feel to me like a last resort if we're going to have to formally resolve complaints. I have a question at this point to the room, and there are representatives of the FNOs here, and you have been very quiet. Is there anyone from one of the FNOs who actually want to comment on what's been said or want to ask a question? Okay, amazing crickets. Right, More comments, suggestions, questions? Okay, I think then we've exhausted the topic for now. Sorry, I've lost my notes. So.
There we go. Okay, so I am now standing between you and lunch, and I'm going to be presenting to you the results of ISPA's February 2024 F&O Perception Survey. Before I do that, just to encourage you, if you have not read our best practice document, please ask us for a copy, have a read through. You can probably get through it in 10 minutes if you read quickly. So, what is our F&O Perception Survey? We did a early version in March 2023. It was open to anyone. It was a public survey. You could go and fill it in. We rebranded it specifically as a perception survey and ran it using the ISPA member portal in August 2023, and we've just repeated it again in 2024. Essentially, ISPs are asked to rate 34 different fiber networks on 11 different criteria on a scale of 0 to 10. Some FNOs, in fact the majority of those FNOs are rated by a small number of ISPs because they operate in limited areas or they don't have a lot of ISPs, and we tend to comment only on the ones that get more than about 10 responses. But we do publish the full results. You can go and look at the August results, no matter what size FNO you are. If you've got any ratings at all, you can go and look at the results on our website, and we will publish the results from February next week. So, overall number of responses. In August, we had 48 ISPs that provided 276 ratings. That meant they rated an average of 5.7 FNOs each. Last month, we had 50 ISPs, so more responded, but they rated slightly fewer, about 4.7 each. I'm not sure whether that means ISPs are more focused on using specific FNOs or whether they're just a little bit tired of having to do ratings. This is how many ratings we got for the networks. OpenServe, 29 ratings, most ISPs, followed by DFA, 28. And looking at the bottom there, we've got 9 ratings for Link. Liquid jumped up. We didn't have as many as 9 last time. And really interesting for me, Vodacom came in with 9 ratings, even though it's incredibly difficult to try and sell any services on Vodacom's network as an ISP, but still 9 ratings. Vodacom didn't rate very well, probably that some of those were protest ratings about how difficult it is to sell the services. So, first of all, quick run through what the metrics are and how they changed. We're going from highest average rating across the top 9. Technical proficiency, reliability, and friendliness of staff. Those are the top 3 rated average. It's kind of good to know. The views of the ISPs is that FNOs are generally pretty technically proficient, generally pretty reliable, and the friendliness of staff is good. We did see that on average everything except open access principles dropped slightly from August to February. Open access, maybe our best practice recommendations are having some impact, but that climbed slightly to 6. At the bottom end of the scale, we see 3 things. Optimism that a particular FNO will improve, not looking good. 5.5, down 0.3. Support, pet peeve. ISPs do not feel well supported by FNOs. It's sitting at 5.4, it dropped. And the lowest is the likelihood that as an ISP, I will recommend this particular FNO to another ISP. That's bottom of the scale, 5.3 on the average. Right, let's have a look at individual networks. Mixed news for DFA. DFA score really well on open access. You see 7. It's the only 7 score. This is the February thing, 7.5. So the Mazif people in the room, if you're looking at a better model to follow, DFA scores really well on open access compared to some of the other bits of that structure. So have a look at what DFA's business model is. Unfortunately, not doing so well at the bottom there in terms of reliability and support. With a 3.5 on support, that is not a great score to have. I think we can all hope and be optimistic that DFA will improve some of those scores and maybe be our most improved in 6 months' time. We shall see. Frogfoot, not great news for Frogfoot either. Everything was down slightly, not as much as some of the networks, but we're seeing here the bottom one, value sitting at 4.3. Clearly over the last 6 months, the perception of the value that ISPs get from Frogfoot has dropped. Link Africa scored really well. Everything went up. Support, 6.8, that's great, but look at all those 7s. 7 is a pretty good score in the scale of things. Link Africa scoring great on technical, reliability, business process, value. Open access, 7.9 on open access. Clearly that's another good model to look at if you want to be running an open access model. What is Link Africa doing? Liquid didn't get enough ratings in our August survey for us to comment on them, but they are our most improved on the list. Interestingly, promoting went up 2.2 on the score. That means more ISPs are doing business with Liquid and are more likely to recommend doing business to Liquid to other ISPs. A little work to be done in terms of business processes and software systems there because they're sitting at 4, but that is already an improvement over 6 months ago. Metro Fiber had 2 things drop, value and reliability down a little bit, but still very respectable, 6.9, 6.7. Metro Fiber clearly have great staff, 7.9 is almost an A. That's very difficult, none of these scores are 8s, so 7.9 is really good, that's also improved, and business processes up 7.4, technical 7.5. This is pretty good scores, Metro Fiber, you should be patting your staff on the back. Octatel fairly stable. We see a little bit of an increase in a few things, a little bit of a decrease in some. Oddly enough, Optimism is the one that dropped the most. People, maybe because of some of the last-minute price increase notices, Octatel dropped a little bit in the Optimism, but still scores very well. Communication staff, technical support, and reliability. Still very respectable scores overall. OpenServe has not fared well in the last 6 months. They're still doing well on open access. Reliability 7.9 is an excellent score. So if you have an existing OpenServe circuit, the reliability of that is apparently very good. But it's a struggle to get new services right now. Business processes, software systems, and Optimism all down by 1.5 points into the 5s. OpenServe were our highest scorer in August. They are no longer our highest scorer. There is work to be done here if you are OpenServe. Last one on the list. Vumatel has also not fared particularly well. You can see downward arrows for all of these things, and there are 4 scores sitting in the 4s at this point. Support, value, communications, and the likelihood of promoting. Support and communications are an area that you can invest more in improving it. Vumatel, please communicate better and provide better support to your ISPs, and these scores are bound to go up. Overall scores. This is what the scoreboard for these top 8 looked like in August. OpenServe number 1 with 7. Octatel and Metro Fiber were tied at 6.8. Frogfoot 6.3. Vuma 6. Link Africa 5.9. DFA 5.8. Liquid we didn't include in the ranking, but I've included what it was here, 4.7, because we have now added Liquid. This is what the scores look like in February. Metro Fiber is now in top place with 6.9. Congratulations to Metro Fiber, up from 2nd place. Link Africa, the biggest mover in terms of the list, up from 6th place to 2nd with 6.8. Well done to Link Africa. Octatel holding very respectably in there. It was Metro Fiber and Octatel were tied at 2nd place. Octatel's gone down slightly, but still very respectable, 6.3. OpenServe, the biggest mover down from 1st to 4th, but still with a 6.1 on average. Liquid up from 8th place, the biggest improvement, 1.2. And then we see Frogfoot, Vuma, and DFA all moving down a little bit from 4th, 5th, and 7th place to 6th, 7th, and 8th. Those are the results. We're now going to play a little bit of a game. Yes, congratulations to all of the FNOs. It is perception, so this is what the ISPs think of you. It's not necessarily how your network is actually performing, but we hope it's still useful feedback to get. We're going to play a little game of Guess the FNO. Answers will not be provided. You're going to be left guessing. But we did something different for this survey. We had a little box at the end that said, what one piece of feedback would you like to provide for this operator? And in the words of someone who filled it in, this was a really cathartic addition to add to this survey. So what did we get? It's nice to be able to write something that you think someone's going to read. And we do intend to give these results, every word, to any F&O that wants it from us. We will happily share this feedback. So let's have a look at these. And what struck me about these, we're going to look at a few examples anonymized, is the difference you get. So we have here, going backwards rapidly has taken a turn for the worse, and then far better than any other F&O in South Africa. This illustrates very clearly the value of a good account manager, because you can bet that the first two on this list had a very different account manager for the third one on this list. Again, here we see, not great news, support needs vast improvements. Worse news, support is terrible. Great news, support is improved. All from the same survey for the same member. This one, the second and third one, that juxtaposition. A great relationship. Next person, I'm giving up on them. Again, account managers make an enormous difference here. Wonder if you can guess which F&O this is. I can't remember which one it is. I mix them up quite a lot, so I don't remember. But honestly, this list could apply to any F&O in the right circumstances. It really could. Fourth one. This is the last one I put up for now. This one I put up because I really liked that second piece. They really try. I thought that was it was complimentary. I want to do business with a company that really tries, but at the same time, there's a little bit of unspoken, if they really try, it implies they're not always succeeding. So if I'm doing business with that company, I want them because they try, but at the back of my mind thinking, I'm going to experience some glitches because they have to try rather than succeed. But I like this. This was, I thought, was a good compliment. That is it. Some final comments. This is a perception survey. It measures how ISPs perceive the fiber network operators. Everyone understands the metrics differently. It is just a measure of people's perception. That means it's limited, but despite the limitations, we believe that these are a useful assessment of how ISPs see the fiber network operators, and more importantly, it's going to be interesting to see how that perception varies over time. We do intend to keep repeating this survey, and we'll see who goes up, who's go down, and which aspects of their businesses change. If you are an F&O, any one of the 34 that we did stats on, and you would like copies, full results of how people scored you, please send mail to Secretariat at ISPA with that subject line. And once we've recovered from the conference next week, we will happily send you the full breakdown of everything we have from our members on that. And finally, thanks to all of the ISPA members who took the time to provide the ratings. We realize that it takes some time. Hopefully it's a little bit cathartic to do it. But we appreciate you doing that, because without those, we cannot keep measuring how the F&Os are performing and provide that feedback. We will be repeating the survey again, probably in about 6 months' time in 2024. And there's a bonus couple if you want to have some guesses for this one. Yeah, that one's hard to guess. Although maybe please fix the short outages might give you a hint. And then this one I like. Stop trying to fool us with increasing the speed and then increasing the prices. Again, that could apply to a large number of F&Os. And we are done. Thank you very much. Happy to take one or two questions, but there is lunch, so if there are no questions, we can go straight to lunch. Anybody have any questions? I see Alan. You running to lunch or running to the microphone? Running to the microphone.
Because it's only, this survey is only as good as the number of ISPs that participate in it. So thanks to everybody for participating in this. I think this is, it's really amazing. It's coming along quite nicely.
I wanted to have a note of thanks to the F&Os who were brave enough to have panelists up here earlier. It was, we invited more F&Os than there were panelists, so it is brave of you. I really do know how shy the F&Os can be to sit in a room filled with ISPs and have to answer difficult questions, because it's a difficult business to be in. We thank you for being here, even if you weren't in the panel, but you're here in the audience participating. Thank you. We would like to talk more to you. We are all part of the same value chain, and we appreciate your participation in the event. Thank you. No more questions. There is lunch. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the day and the rest of the week.